GoForThe2.com in with the Week 7 college predictions. Week number 6 did not disappoint and sets the stage for a monumental Week number 7 that will dictate conference championships and, more importantly, college football playoff berths that are on the line. This is potentially the best weekend of college football of the whole 2022 campaign, and we'll see how it plays out. About 7 picks on the video. If you want all the analysis of all the games, tune into Carver and Lisi every Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to midnight, Sirius Channel 159, SportsGridRadio.com. We get you prepped and ready. Then Saturday mornings, College Football Today, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern. We get you prepped and ready for kickoff with a 3-hour kickoff show. We go through best bets, prop bets, spreads, you name it. We cover it. SportsGrid.com, SportsGrid Radio, and Sirius Channel 159 every Saturday, College Football Today. So tune in. You can always hit me up on Twitter at GoForThe2, the number 2, and all the picks will be up on the website, GoForThe2.com. Mark with Monday night spreads here in New Jersey. Let's jump right into it. There's 7 games on the docket. We'll talk about the big one in Austin Saturday at noon between Texas and Iowa State. Texas got a monumental win, snapping a 4-game losing streak to Oklahoma. They pounded the rock for 296 yards on the ground. Quinn Ewers stepped up, dominating performance, completing 21 of 31, 289 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. They get the 49-point win in Dallas and just abuse Brett Venables and that Oklahoma defense. Now here comes Iowa State. They're coming off a loss to Kansas State. They're 0-3 in the conference. They lost as 1.5-point home dogs to the Kansas State Wildcats. Lost that ball game 10-9. They've won 3 straight, though, in the series by an average margin of victory of 9.3 points per game. Picked up this victory last year in Ames, 30-7. I think they could be in this number of 16.5 Saturday afternoon. Couple of reasons why I favor Iowa State in this ballgame. Defensively, they're holding opposing offenses to 91 yards rushing on the ground. Secondary only giving up 186 yards to opposing quarterbacks, and they play one of the top third down defenses in all of college football. Top 15, holding opposing offenses to only 29% in terms of their third down conversions. I think that'll travel well on the road in Austin Saturday afternoon. When you look at Hunter Deckers and this offense for Iowa State, averaging around 245 passing yards per game. Decker stepped up last week, made some solid decisions, but couldn't pull that ball game out. He has a big play wide receiver in Xavier Hutchinson coming off back-to-back 100-yard games last week against Kansas State, 8 receptions, 100 yards. He now has 54 receptions, over 600 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I think Iowa State can move the football, sustain drives, and keep Quinn Ewers on the sidelines. Matt Campbell, 0-3 in the conference, catching now almost 2 touchdowns and a field goal. I think they're well within this number, coupled with the fact that Texas has potentially a look-ahead game next week, week number 8 in Stillwater against Oklahoma State. Texas wins, but Iowa State does cover the 16.5-point number Saturday afternoon in Austin. 3 big SEC games. Let's jump right into the big one. 3rd Saturday in October, Alabama and Tennessee. Tennessee, a monumental road win, laying 2.5 points in Death Valley against LSU. That was a series perspective that LSU had won 5 straight. Last time they played was back in 2017. Hendon Hooker in the offense made some plays, but it was the defense that forced turnovers against LSU. It allowed Tennessee to build a double-digit lead that made LSU and Jaden Daniels one-dimensional, and they never looked back. They pounded the rock for over 200 yards en route to the dominating 20-point win over the LSU Tigers. Now, here comes Alabama. Alabama got pushed to the limit against Texas A&M and Haynes King. Haynes King had a dynamic day, 232 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns in that game. Couldn't pull it out in terms of the last 4th down attempt that fell short of the goal line. You look at Jalen Milroe, he stepped up, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Alabama again pounded the rock for over 288 yards on the ground against the front 7 of Texas A&M. Let's keep in mind, Alabama has dominated the series. They have won 15 straight over the Tennessee Volunteers. The last three by an average margin of victory of 27 points per game. Picked up this victory last year in Tuscaloosa as a 24.5-point favorite, 52-24. It was a one-score game heading into the fourth before Bryce Young pulled away in that matchup. There's a couple of reasons, though, why I favor Alabama here, with or without Bryce Young at the helm. If it is Jalen Milroe, I still like the athleticism of Milroe on the perimeter. I like the rushing attack of Alabama going on the road. In order to win games on the road, you need to pound the rock. Alabama right now averaging 6.9 yards per carry. That is Alabama's highest yards per carry since prior to 2009 and Nick Saban got to Tuscaloosa. That's how well the offensive line is playing. That's how well Milroe and, more importantly, running back Jamar Gibbs are running the football right now against opposing offenses. They're staying in manageable third down situations, and that really benefits their defense right now. Their defense, in terms of Alabama, only allowing 84 rushing yards per game. They're allowing only 166 passing yards to opposing quarterbacks, and one of the top third down defenses in all of college football, right behind Minnesota, who's only given up 17%. Alabama holding opposing offenses to 22% of their third down opportunities. Going on the road in Neyland Stadium, I know Hendon Hooker stepped up in recent weeks, but this is a different animal. I think Alabama does win this ball game, anywhere from 14 to 17 points Saturday afternoon. I like the speed of Alabama on the perimeter. I like the rushing attack. And more importantly, I like the secondary matching up against the wide receivers of Tennessee. Could be close for a half, but in the second half, Alabama pulls away and wins their 16th straight over the Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee playing very well. I'll give them their props. Over the last 3 weeks, they're averaging 242 yards on the ground. Their front seven held LSU to only 2.9 yards per carry, but this is a different animal in terms of the physicality of Alabama's offensive line. That's the difference. Alabama wears them down in the second half of this ball game en route to the 7.5-point win and cover in Neyland Stadium. We'll keep it in the Southeastern Conference. LSU and Florida. Florida got a 7-point win over Missouri. LSU got abused by Tennessee. Now they go on the road in the Swamp. It's a rivalry game. LSU has won 3 straight in the series by an average margin of victory of 8 points per game. Picked up this victory last year in Death Valley, 49-42, as an 11.5-point underdog. That was the game that Ty Davis Price set a career high and school record, 287 yards on the ground. LSU pounded the rock for over 300 in that ball game. Now they go on the road Saturday night in the Swamp. Going to be a very dynamic atmosphere for Anthony Richardson and the Florida Gators and Billy Napier. But I still like LSU in this matchup. I still favor the rushing attack of LSU, averaging 172 yards on the ground. They have a veteran quarterback in Jaden Daniels. I know he came on late, but he still finished with 300 yards in that ball game. But Brian Kelly on the road or on a neutral field site since 2018, going back to Notre Dame and now LSU, 20-6 overall straight up. I like that. I think it carries well. Here's the other factor as well. Brian Kelly in the regular season hasn't lost back-to-back games, in the regular season since 2016. I know he lost against Clemson and Alabama, but those were in playoff and championship environments, different than the regular season. I like that, traveling on the road to Florida. Also, don't like Florida's front seven. They're giving up 183 rushing yards to opposing offenses, but more importantly, that third down defense is allowing opposing offenses to convert 50% of their third down opportunities. If you can't get off the field, you can't give your offense more opportunities to score, and Florida's offense right now, only 5 passing touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I don't think that plays well into this ball game going up against LSU's secondary. I still give the Tigers defense the advantage, catching 2.5 points. I think they strike the mild upset Saturday night in the Swamp. Another underdog is Kentucky against Miss State. You look at the series since 2015, these teams have alternated every other year. Last year, Miss State got the victory in Starkville. Now they go on the road to Lexington. The last time they were there, they forced 6 interceptions against KJ Costello en route to the 26-2 win. biggest factor for me is the identity for Kentucky's lost right now. Without Will Levis last week, they're only averaging right now for Kentucky 92 rushing yards per game. They haven't rushed for over 130 yards all season long. When you compare it to last year, they had 7 games where they rushed for over 200 yards. They were 6-1 in those games and won those games by an average margin of victory of 17 points per game. Here comes Miss State. Will Rogers playing lights out. Back-to-back wins against A&M and Arkansas last week without KJ Jefferson. They're throwing the football for about 354 yards through the air. Will Rogers, the last 3 games, 12 touchdowns, no interceptions. But I like Mark Stoops. I like Kentucky catching a touchdown at home in this ballgame. I think they get back to basics. They look to run the football with Smoke and Chris Rodriguez. I think they look to sustain drives and look to get Miss State into an ugly type of ballgame. Still like the wide receivers of Tavion Robinson and Brown going up against the secondary of Mississippi State. Even if it's Sharon at quarterback, even though I expect Will Levis to play, if it is Sharon, I think they bounce back in a big way. Catching a touchdown, I think Kentucky strikes the upset over Mississippi State Saturday night in Lexington. Big battle taking place in Utah. The Utes versus USC. We know what happened to Utah last week. They started slow. UCLA jumped up, forced Cam Rising and Tavion Thomas out of their game plan, and Utah could never get back into that matchup. They cut it to like a touchdown. Every time they got it close, UCLA pulled away, and I really felt that UCLA was the better team, and I said it all year. UCLA, in my opinion, the best team, most complete offensive and defensive lines in the conference. I think they do match up very well next weekend against Oregon, and obviously we'll see how that game plays out in week number 8. But you look at this matchup against USC. You look at last year. Utah got the victory in the Coliseum, their first win in LA since 1916. That was a monumental win for the Utes. They beat up USC by 26 points in that ball game. I know it was an interim staff, but we know what Utah wants to do. They want to pound the football between the tackles, and they want to go right after the front 7 of USC that's given up 152 yards on the ground. They've gotten a little bit better in back-to-back games against Arizona State and Washington State, USC's front 7, but Utah's going to challenge them, especially playing at home. Look for them to get into an ugly type of game, and I think that's where you have to favor the physicality of Utah in this ballgame. I'm not sold on Alex Grinch in this defense. I think Caleb Williams could maybe throw some turnovers and interceptions in this game. It's a contrast in style, so we'll see how it plays out. You look at USC going on the road to Corvallis a few weeks ago. They struggled with Oregon State's defense. I think they struggle with Utah. I think Utah does win this ball game by 7 points. Look for a lower scoring game, 27-20. Utah pulls it out in Rice-Eccles. I think the physicality of the offensive line is the difference, and look for Utah to wear down a smaller front 7 in USC in this ball game. Turn our attention to the big ball game in the Big House. You're talking about Penn State and Michigan right now. Penn State right now coming off a bye week. I think that's very beneficial going on the road to face the Michigan Wolverines. Michigan got a methodical win as a 22.5-point favorite over Indiana. We talked about it throughout Carver and Lisi. If you listen to the show, those games in Bloomington were traditionally very close. Michigan had won last year by 25 points per game, but that was in the Big House. Previous in the COVID year, Michael Penix knocked off Michigan. There were 3 games since 2010 that Indiana played Michigan toe-to-toe and only lost by 7 points per game. So it was expected with a potential look ahead that Michigan might struggle from the spread perspective. Both offenses are pounding the rock. You have Penn State that's averaging 192 yards on the ground, Michigan averaging 212 yards on the ground, and they're 11-0 over the last couple of years playing at home in Ann Arbor. That's an added benefit for the Wolverines. But in order to win games on the road, we talk about it all the time. You need to be able to run the football. Penn State can do that. They have a veteran quarterback with Sean Clifford, and I like their defense right now. Right now, you look at Penn State holding opposing offenses to 79 rushing yards per game, 29% on third down conversions. And even though statistically their secondary is giving up 256 passing yards per game, I still like Joey Porter, and I like those defensive backs matching up with the Michigan wide receivers on the road, catching 6.5 points. I think Penn State strikes the upset Saturday at noon in the Big House. They inch one step closer to that game October 29th against Ohio State. So keep an eye out for that. I think Penn State's live this coming weekend. Another big ball game takes place in Tallahassee. We have Clemson, we have Florida State. You just look at the dominance by Clemson over the last 3 meetings. They have won 6 straight in the series. The last 3 by an average margin of victory of 30 points per game. You look at this last time they played in Tallahassee, that's where Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne laid 17.5 points. They abused Florida State 59-10. Florida State basically quit in the second half of that ball game. It was the first time in the history of Florida State that you saw players actually quit in the second half. Missed tackles, no follow through, no lack of enthusiasm or intensity. This team is a little bit different. I know they didn't get the win last week against NC State. Jordan Travis made some critical decisions and errors in the second half of that ball game. Threw a critical interception with about 5 minutes left to allow NC State with Chambers to cut that deficit to 17-16, through another interception with 30 seconds left, and then Florida State trailing 19-17 and in field goal range. He decided to go for the touchdown and find Micah Pittman in the end zone. He threw into double coverage and cost Florida State the game. They should have won that ball game as a 3.5-point underdog. They cover, they limp back home. They're 4-2 overall. And here comes Clemson and DJU. I know on paper, Clemson seems like they're the better side, but I like Florida State here. It's back-to-back road games for Clemson. And not only that, I look at this offense right now. Last couple of weeks against Boston College and the previous week in terms of Clemson against NC State, 145 yards on the ground against NC State, 144 against Boston College. They're averaging right in the area of about 175 yards on the ground. Prior to both of those games against Wake Forest, they pounded the rock for 188 yards on the ground. This front seven in Florida State's playing very well. Not only that, their secondary's only given up about 176, 180 passing yards to opposing quarterbacks. They're forcing teams to methodically work down the field. I think this is a potential bounce back spot for Mike Norvell. Biggest game of the year. This is their Super Bowl. Prime time on ABC. I think Florida State strikes the upset. I'm rolling with the Seminoles in a primetime spot. I think they bounce back. They prove that they're one of the better teams in the Atlantic. Let's not forget, you look at that ball game last year, Clemson knocking off Florida State. It was a 3-point game heading into the fourth quarter, and Florida State turned the football over on the last play of the game, and Clemson did recover in the end zone to cover as a 9.5-point favorite. They won that ball game by 10 points. I think Florida State pulls out all the stops. All the pressure right now is on DJU going on the road. I think they bounce back. They're able to run the football, and I think the crowd keeps them in it from start to finish. Florida State outright over the Clemson Tigers. Those are the 7 picks for this coming weekend. We'll go through them. Iowa State plus the 16.5. Alabama minus the 7.5. Kentucky plus the 7. LSU plus the 2.5. Utah minus the 3.5, FSU plus the 3.5, and Penn State plus the 6.5. A lot of dogs on the ticket this weekend. We'll see how it plays out. Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you on Saturday.